Do you ever wake up in the morning and want that warm hug feeling you get from a freshly baked cinnamon roll? I can't wait to try these. Don't worry, it still eats the same.
Welcome to Making Yummy, and today we're making these pumpkin pie cinnamon rolls.
So how do we make pumpkin pie cinnamon rolls? We're going to start by making a brioche dough. Then we're going to make our own pumpkin filling with a freshly made pumpkin spice. And finally, a very special type of icing. First thing though, we got to get our dough going. Now just like I had explained in my bread video, we're going to make a sponge that's going to add flavor to our dough. And here's all the ingredients we're going to need. I've got my flour and some extra flour set aside for the sponge. Then I've got some milk and heavy cream that's been warmed. I've got sugar, salt, and yeast, and some eggs and butter. Now to get our sponge going, we're going to add our yeast to our sponge flour, mix it together. Then we're going to add in our warm milk and heavy cream. And I'm just going to cover it and let it sit for about 45 minutes.
So I've just mixed up my sponge mixture, and while I wait the 45 minutes for it to ferment, I'm going to get my spices ready.
I've got the classic pumpkin pie spices here. We've got some nutmeg, some cinnamon, cloves, crystalized ginger, and then allspice. And all I'm going to do is take my whole spices and grind them up. And you may be thinking that's kind of a strange way to do this, why don't you just go out and buy it? But the truth is, when you make something from fresh spices, it tastes so much better. The flavors are much more potent, and this is one of our first secrets. So all I did was grind those together while my sponge fermented. And then I'm just going to add it to a little jar for later. And now we're going to finish up that brioche.
Our sponge mixture has fermented, and now it's ready to start making the brioche.
So I'm going to take my sugar and my salt and add it to my flour. And now I've got everything ready to start mixing. And we're just going to add the sponge to our mixing bowl. And then after that, we're going to add our eggs. And we're going to mix that together until it's combined. After that, we're going to slowly pour in our flour and then mix it till it forms a ball. And this is part of that process to form gluten for a brioche dough. Now that it's all come together, I'm going to replace the paddle with a dough hook. And this is going to be how we're going to develop the rest of our gluten. So we're going to knead it about 10 to 15 minutes. You'll notice that the dough will change texture over time as you continue to knead it. And finally, once we reach our texture we need, it should form a window pane. And we're good to start adding butter. And we want to make sure our butter is cold when we do this. So I'm just going to weigh it out and cut it into cubes. And I tend to add a lot of cubes all at once. Now you could do it slower. That's perfectly fine, but you do want to make sure that the dough doesn't become greasy because that means the butter's split. If you do see that, that means that you've overmixed it, but still bake it out. Just remember for next time when you make it. And once you see all the butter disappear into the dough, you'll want to scoop it out and put it into a buttered bowl so that way it can rest in the fridge overnight. And this is the perfect type of dough for our pumpkin pie cinnamon rolls.
So we have our dough chilling in the refrigerator, so let's move on to making our filling. First, we're going to have to puree this pumpkin.
So I'm going to use one whole pie pumpkin here. I'm just going to cut the top off of it and then cut it in half. And we're going to try and scoop out those seeds, but I don't have any professional pumpkin tools. I've just got a spoon. And once I've got my pumpkins mostly cleaned out, I'm going to lay them face down on my baking sheet and then cover them with aluminum foil. And these go in a 400-degree oven for about an hour and a half. And while I'm waiting on that, we're going to get to that special icing that I've talked about. So our icing is going to be a ricotta cheese icing. And it's a little bit like what you get inside a cannoli. So our first thing we're going to do is we're going to whip our ricotta and add a little bit of powdered sugar in. And now comes the important part. So to get a really smooth texture out of a ricotta cheese icing, I'm going to pass it through a sieve not once, but twice. And this is going to really smooth it out. I'm going to transfer it back into the bowl and then put it back through the sieve again. And that's going to create a much smoother texture. Now we're not quite done with that icing yet. After we've sieved it out, I'm going to re-whip the ricotta cheese mixture, add in a little bit more sugar and some heavy cream. And we're just going to mix that till it kind of looks like whipped cream. And all I'm going to do is put it in a piping bag and put it in the fridge to rest.
So I baked my pumpkin in a 400-degree oven for about an hour and a half, and now it's ready to be processed into our filling.
So I'm going to scoop out the meat from half of my pumpkin and add it to my food processor. And to that, I'm going to add a little bit of that pumpkin pie spice that we made, some butter, and brown sugar. And then we just need to blitz it all together. Now, if you don't have a food processor, that's totally fine. You can get away with using the paddle attachment on a mixer, and that should get you the same texture.
I've let my dough rest overnight, and now we're ready to assemble everything.
So I'm just going to dust my board with some flour, add my dough to it, and I'm going to punch it down slightly and get it kind of in the shape I need. Add a little bit more flour, and I'm going to roll it out to 15 by 16 inches. And you just want to try and keep it as square as possible. And then we go straight to spreading our filling. Now you want to spread out the filling as even as you can, but leave one strip at the very end where you can tack the dough together. And I'm just going to roll it down towards that strip and neaten it up some. Now you can decide how big of rolls you want. I'm cutting mine 2 inches apart, which gave me 7. Once we cut them out, we're just going to transfer them over to a baking sheet and then cover them with a towel. And now we have to wait about 1.5 hours to 2 hours for them to proof. And then voila.
So I let my rolls proof for about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And now my oven is at 350 degrees. And we're going to bake these off.
Now I baked my rolls at 350 degrees for about 30 to 35 minutes. Now while they're still warm, we're going to pipe the icing on. And I want the icing to melt into the rolls, so I did it while they were still hot. And if yours don't melt like mine did, then you may have piped it on while it was too cold. So just pop them back in the cooling oven for about 5 minutes.
If you like these pumpkin pie cinnamon rolls, check out my other baking videos.